Hello, my wonderful homeroom students. Welcome to another edition of Math TV. Today's episode is lesson 119. We are dividing by a decimal number. Now that is different to than a previous lesson we had, whereas one of our previous lessons we had a problem like this, and I'm underlining in blue, where our dividend, in this case the dividend is 12 hundredths, is being divided by a whole number. Today's lesson is different, where we have a number, could be, in this case, it's a decimal, is our dividend. But what's different today is our divisor, in this case 3/10, is a decimal. So we're learning today how to divide a number by a decimal. That's different in a way that it's still simple. So don't let it get confusing. It's a real simple fix. In this case, we just have to move decimals because we don't want to divide by a decimal without a calculator. So what we do is, in order to get rid of the decimal, we have to move it to the right. If we move it to the left, we're still going to end up with a decimal and a decimal and a decimal. We don't want to do that. So we move it to the right until we get rid of that decimal. So in this case, the decimal right here is before the 3. So we have to move it one spot over, and then we end up, so if we take right here, we have that 3/10. We move that decimal one spot over, we now have 3. So now we're dividing by a whole number. But just like with fractions, if we did something to the numerator, we need to do the same thing to the denominator. So in this case, if we do something to our divisor, in this case our divisor is 3/10, we moved it one spot to the right, we need to do the same thing to our dividend, the number that is being divided. So just like this arrow shows, boom, we move it over one spot to the right. Because we moved it one spot in the divisor, we need to move it one spot in the dividend. So now, instead of 12 hundredths divided by 3/10 like it's written here, we now have a problem like this. 1 and 2/10 divided by 3. And then we do it just like we did with dividing decimals. This decimal goes straight up. First thing you do, move it straight up. And then you do your long division as usual. So that's really all there is to it. Dividing by a decimal number just adds that one little step of trying to get rid of your decimal. So on the example that you will see on your notes, a couple of them you have here that I added. So we started with 2 and 34 hundredths divided by 6/10. So again, we want to get rid of that 6/10. We don't like it unless we have a calculator, but we're not because you're still showing your work. As you can see written right here, let's go orange. We move the decimal one spot to the right to get rid of it. So now instead of 6/10, we are left with 6, which is better. We want to divide by a whole number if we can. So again, whatever we did to our divisor, we need to do the same to our dividend. So our divisor was 6/10, we changed it to 6. Our dividend, our decimal was between the 2 and the 3. We need to change that too. Since over here, we moved it one spot to the right. In our dividend, we move it one spot to the right. So now instead of being between the 2 and the 3, we moved it to being between the 3 and the 4. So we move it over and bring it straight up. So over one spot, bring it straight up. Real simple. Then you just do your long division. But again, don't forget, you move it over in your divisor. You need to move it over in the same number of spots in your dividend. Let's say we move it in our divisor 1, but over here we move it and we end up putting our decimal over here in the wrong spot, and we bring it straight up, we're going to have a wrong answer. So count the number of decimal spots you move it. So here it's over 1, over here it's over 1. Keep it simple. Don't try to think too much into it. So looking at this example problem over here, this started with 5/10. So our decimal was right there. We don't want it there to do division. We want to get rid of it. We want to change it into a whole number. We do that, boom, by moving it over just like that. So, and again, same thing has to be done over here. We move it up and then bring it up, or bring it over and then bring it up. And now we can do it. So now we end up with 75 divided by 5. So that's the simple steps there. Move it over in your divisor, move it over in your dividend, and then do your multiplication. Don't try to think too much into it. So now here we can see a little more complicated problems, but everything stays the same. Nothing changes. Let's go green. So here I started with a 2-digit decimal. So I have 12 hundredths. So I moved it over in my example 2 spots to get it from 12 tenths to 12. So if I did that to my divisor, what do I need to do over here? You're right, move it over 2 spots. So originally it starts between the 1 and the 4. I move it over 2 spots and straight up. Again, important. Just like I said earlier with the fractions, do the same numerator and denominator. You do the same here. You move it over 2 spots here. You move it over 2 spots here. The same direction. And then you just do your long division. Real simple. 12 goes into 14 one time. You do the subtraction, end up with 2. Bring down your 4. 12 goes into 24 2 times. So we get the 2 here. And then 2 times 12 is 24. Then we subtract, we get 0. And then we have to bring down. We bring down the 1. How many times does 12 go into 1? 0 times. Don't forget that 0 again. A lot of times you forget that. 0 times 12 is 0. We have a 1. Bring down the 2. And we end up with no remainder. Again, decimals, no remainders. Then over here we have a situation where I start with 20 hundredths. Now, it's not very often you're going to start with that number, but I just picked one that was simple to work. So we have 2 decimal spots to get rid of it. Boom, boom. And now we're at 20. And another way you could also have done that is moved it over 1 spot and you would have ended up with 2, which would be just as fine. But in this case, I just picked simple numbers. So we move it over 2 spots. Guess what we have to do over here? 2 spots. But when I moved it over 2 spots, this 0 was not originally there. It was 2 4/10 divided by 20 hundredths. So I had to change it. So if you move your decimals over and you end up with a blank spot there, you fill it with a 0, just like we've done all year long. And then you do your long division after that. Remember, bring that decimal straight up. After you move it, depending on how many spots, go straight up. So that's the key when it comes dividing, when you're dividing by decimals. So if your divisor is a decimal, you just move it over to turn it into a whole number. And then after you move it into your divisor, also move it the same spot in your dividend and just do the same long division. Again, with decimals, bring it straight up before you solve and no remainders. If you end up with a remainder, something happened. Again, call or email with any questions, and I'd love to help you. And then have fun. Bye!